You ever notice how easy it is to spot immaturity in other people, but how hard it is to see it in ourselves? It's like this magnifying glass effect. We can look at someone else and go, man, they are acting childish right now. But then when we're in the middle of it, when we're the ones feeling defensive or angry or shutting down, we justify it. We tell ourselves, well, I only did that because they, or if they hadn't said this, I wouldn't have reacted that way. That's the trick about emotional immaturity. It's sneaky. It feels justified in the moment. It feels like protection. But if we zoom out, if we're willing to be brutally honest with ourselves, we can see that a lot of the ways we handle conflict, criticism, or stress, they don't actually protect us. They just keep us stuck. And here's the truth: emotional immaturity doesn't care how old you are. You could be 50 years old, running a company, and still throw tantrums like a child when you don't get your way. Or you could be 20 years old, brand new in the workforce, and handle situations with calm, grace, and composure beyond your years. Emotional maturity is not about age, it's about ownership. And if you want to grow in it, you've got to be willing to look at yourself and say, okay, what are the signs that I might not be as mature as I thought? So let's start with the first big one, the one that shows up everywhere in your relationships, in your work, in your friendships, even in how you talk to yourself. It's the inability to handle criticism. Now, don't get me wrong, nobody loves criticism. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I'm really looking forward to today? Someone pointing out all my flaws. That's not how it works. Criticism stings. It pokes at our pride. It can feel like rejection. But the difference between maturity and immaturity is not whether criticism hurts. It's how you handle it when it comes. Think about the immature response. Somebody gives you feedback at work, and immediately your defense system kicks in. You interrupt. You explain. You deflect. Maybe you even attack back. Well, you didn't do this either. Or, who are you to talk? It's like a ping-pong match where instead of receiving the ball, you just keep smacking it back as hard as you can. And what happens? The other person stops trying. They stop giving you feedback. Not because you've got it all figured out, but because you've made it unsafe for them to be honest with you. Now, let's look at another angle. Sometimes it's not explosive defensiveness. Sometimes it's quiet withdrawal. Someone tells you something you could improve, and instead of lashing out, you shut down. You avoid eye contact, you cross your arms, you start playing with your phone, and inside your head, you're spiraling. I'm such a failure. I can't do anything right. Why do they always pick on me? That's immaturity too. Because instead of engaging with the feedback, you've retreated into self-pity. And let me tell you, self-pity feels safer than defensiveness, but it's just as destructive because it shuts the door to growth. The mature response, it looks completely different. A mature person listens, not just to the words, but to the intention behind the words. They don't jump to defend, they don't crumble into shame, they pause. They breathe. They ask questions. They look for truth in what's being said. And even if the delivery wasn't perfect, even if the feedback came out harsh or clumsy, they still say, okay, is there something in here that can make me better? That's maturity. That's strength. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine two employees at the same company. Both get the same piece of feedback from their boss. Hey, I've noticed your reports have some errors. I need you to double check them before you send them in. The first employee rolls their eyes, crosses their arms, and mutters under their breath, well, maybe if you gave me more time, there wouldn't be errors. That employee walks away frustrated, their boss walks away frustrated, and the relationship gets a little more tense. That's immaturity. The second employee hears the same feedback, takes a breath, and says, got it. Thanks for pointing that out. I'll make sure to check more carefully before I send them in. Same feedback, totally different reaction. Which employee do you think gets more trust, more responsibility, more opportunities? It's obvious, not because they were perfect, but because they showed maturity. Now let's bring this closer to home. Think about your relationships. If your partner tells you, "Hey, I feel like you're on your phone a lot during dinner," how do you respond? The immature response is, "Oh, so I'm just a terrible partner now. You're on your phone too, you know." That's defensiveness. The other immature response is to sulk, to stay quiet and think, "Wow, I can't do anything right." But the mature response is to say, "I hear you. I didn't realize that bothered you. I'll put my phone away during dinner." Which of those three builds connection? Which of those three builds trust? You know the answer. See, here's the deal. If you can't handle criticism, you can't grow. Because criticism, when it's done with the right heart, shows us blind spots we can't see on our own. None of us can see ourselves completely. We all have areas where we're missing it. And if the only feedback you accept is praise, you'll stay stuck in the same place forever. But if you can learn to receive correction without crumbling or lashing out, you open the door to transformation. But I know what you're thinking. Jefferson, what if the criticism isn't fair? What if it's mean-spirited? What if it's not true? And that's a good question. Here's my answer. Maturity doesn't mean you accept every piece of criticism as gospel truth. Maturity means you filter. You sift through it like you're panning for gold. You ask yourself, is there something here I can use? Even if 90% of what they said was off base, is there 10% that I can learn from? And if the answer is yes, you take it, you grow. If the answer is no, you let it go. But either way, you don't get defensive. You don't attack back. You don't crumble into shame. Because at the end of the day, you are responsible for your growth, not anyone else's delivery. Let me give you a phrase that will change the way you handle criticism. Ready? Here it is. Thank you for telling me. That's it. 4 words. Thank you for telling me. You don't have to agree with everything they said. You don't have to promise to change your entire life. But when someone gives you feedback, you thank them for caring enough to speak up. You show them it's safe to be honest with you. And then later, in your own time, you reflect on it. You decide what to keep and what to let go. That's how you build maturity. That's how you build trust. Now let's move to the second big sign of emotional immaturity, emotional outbursts. And let me tell you, this one is huge. Because if you've ever been around someone who can't control their emotions, you know how exhausting it is. You feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time, waiting for the next explosion. And maybe that someone is you. If you want to know whether someone is emotionally immature, watch what they do when things go wrong. Do they immediately look outward, point fingers, and say, "It's not my fault"? Or do they look inward, pause, and ask, "What part did I play in this? What could I have done differently?" That single difference tells you everything about someone's maturity level. Blame is easy. Responsibility is hard. That's why so many people choose blame. You know this instinct. Something breaks at home, and before you even think, your mouth opens and out comes, "Who did this?" Something goes wrong at work, and instead of pausing to think through your own actions, you jump straight to, "Well, that's because so didn't do their job." Blame is the knee-jerk reaction. And it feels good in the moment because it takes the heat off of you. It protects your ego. But over time, blame destroys trust because no one wants to be around someone who never owns their part. Here's the trap of blame. When you live in blame mode, you're giving away all your power. Think about it. If every mistake in your life is someone else's fault, then what does that make you? A victim. And if you're a victim, you have no control, no agency, no ability to change your circumstances. You're stuck waiting for everyone else to change so your life can get better. That's exhausting. That's disempowering. And that is the hallmark of immaturity. But when you take responsibility, real honest responsibility, you take your power back. You say, you know what? I can't control everything, but I can control me. I can control my choices, my reactions, my words. That's maturity. That's strength. Now let's get practical. What does blame sound like in everyday life? It sounds like this. I'm late because traffic was bad. I snapped at you because you wouldn't stop nagging me. I didn't get the promotion because my boss doesn't like me. I drink because my job is stressful. I can't be happy because of how my parents raised me. Do you see the pattern? All of these statements take the weight off the speaker and put it onto something else. The traffic, the spouse, the boss, the stress, the parents. It's always someone else's fault. Now, is there some truth in those statements? Sure. Traffic can make you late. Stress can push you toward unhealthy coping. A boss might actually have a bias. But here's the maturity shift. You can acknowledge the circumstances without handing them the keys to your life. You can say, traffic was bad, but I could have left earlier. Or, I was stressed, but I chose to pour a drink instead of taking a healthier outlet. Or, my boss might not like me, but what can I do to improve my work, my relationships, or maybe even look for a healthier environment? See the difference. It's ownership. Let me share this with you. Blame builds walls, responsibility builds bridges. When you blame, you separate yourself from others. You make them the problem. But when you take responsibility, you create connection because you're willing to own your part. Think about relationships. If every argument turns into, well, you did this. Yeah, but you did that. Yeah, but you started it. You end up in a blame cycle where no one feels heard and nothing gets resolved. But imagine instead if you said, you know what? I shouldn't have raised my voice. That was on me. Do you know what happens in that moment? You create space for the other person to own their part too. Responsibility is contagious. When one person owns up, it lowers the defenses of the other. And that's how real healing starts. I want you to think about the last conflict you had. Did you take ownership of your part, even a small one? Or did you jump straight to blame? Because here's the truth, in almost every conflict, there's at least a sliver of responsibility on both sides. It might not be 50-50, but it's rarely 100-0. If you want to grow in maturity, you've got to get comfortable asking yourself, what's my percentage in this? Even if it's just 10%, own that 10%. Don't wait for the other person to own theirs first. Maturity goes first. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But Jefferson, what if it really wasn't my fault? What if someone else truly did wrong me? That's a fair question. And the answer is, maturity doesn't mean you take the blame for things that aren't yours. Maturity means you take ownership of what is yours. If you were wrong, you don't blame yourself for their behavior, but you do take responsibility for how you respond to it. You take responsibility for your healing. You take responsibility for the boundaries you set moving forward. See the difference? You're not blaming yourself for their choices. You're owning your own choices. That's the power of maturity. I'll give you an example from parenting because kids are the perfect mirror for this. Imagine your child spills a glass of milk. The immature parent reaction is to yell, "Why can't you be more careful? Now look at this mess." That's blame. The mature parent reaction is to say, okay, accidents happen. Let's clean this up together. That's responsibility. One reaction shames the child and makes them afraid of mistakes. The other teaches them accountability and resilience. Which parent do you think raises more confident, responsible kids? The answer is obvious. But let's flip it. Sometimes it's the parent who makes the mistake. Maybe you lose your temper. Maybe you snap at your kid unfairly. The immature response is to justify it. Well, if you had listened the first time, I wouldn't have yelled. That's blame. The mature response is to look your child in the eye and say, that was wrong of me. I shouldn't have raised my voice. "I'm sorry." Do you know how powerful that is to model responsibility for your child? To show them that even adults mess up and the right thing to do is to own it. That's emotional maturity in action. See, emotional immaturity says, "I can't help it, I just react." Emotional maturity says, "I feel it, but I choose how I respond." That's the key difference. Now, here's why this matters so much. When you don't regulate your emotions, you put the burden of your feelings on everyone else around you. You make them walk on eggshells. People start thinking, "I have to be careful around her because she might blow up. I have to tiptoe around him because he might shut down." And when people feel like they have to manage your emotions for you, they stop trusting you. They stop feeling safe with you. And without safety, relationships can't grow. Let me be blunt. You can't have deep love. You can't have strong leadership. You can't have true influence if you can't regulate your emotions. Because no one wants to follow someone unpredictable. No one wants to confide in someone unstable. And no one wants to be in a relationship where they never know which version of you they're going to get. That's why emotional regulation is the mark of maturity. Now, here's what people misunderstand. Regulating your emotions doesn't mean suppressing them. It doesn't mean you never cry, never get angry, never feel anxious. Suppression is just as unhealthy as explosion. Emotional maturity is not about pretending you don't feel. It's about noticing what you feel, understanding it, and then choosing the wisest way to express it. Think about it like this: emotions are like toddlers. You don't want to lock them in the closet, but you also don't want to let them drive the car. They belong in the back seat, buckled up, acknowledged, but not in control. You hear them, you attend to them, but you keep your hands on the wheel. That's what emotional regulation looks like. Now, let's get practical. How do you regulate? How do you build this maturity? It starts with awareness. You can't regulate what you don't notice. Most people react so fast, they don't even realize what they're feeling until after the damage is done. So the first step is to slow down enough to name it. Anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment, whatever it is, name it. Because when you name it, you tame it. You create space between you and the feeling. Then, once you've named it, you breathe. And I don't mean just casually taking a breath. I mean deliberately using your breath to reset your nervous system. Because here's the science. When your emotions spike, your body goes into fight or flight. Your heart races, your muscles tense, your brain actually shuts down the part responsible for rational thinking. That's why you say and do dumb things in the heat of the moment. But the fastest way to flip that switch back is through your breath. Slow, deep, intentional breathing signals to your body, hey, we're safe, we're okay. That's why maturity starts with something as simple as taking 3 deep breaths before you respond. But it doesn't stop there. Emotional regulation also means choosing the right outlet. Sometimes you don't need to react at all. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is walk away, take a break, process on your own, and come back when you're calmer. Other times it means expressing your feelings, but in a way that's clear, respectful, and non-destructive. Saying, "I feel hurt" when you dismiss my ideas, instead of "you're always so disrespectful." Same emotion, 2 very different outcomes. One builds connection, the other burns it down. Now, let me address another misconception. People often think, well, if I don't explode, then I'm bottling it up. No, bottling is when you don't deal with it at all. Regulation is when you acknowledge it and release it in a healthy way. Sometimes that means journaling. Sometimes it means talking to a trusted friend. Sometimes it means going for a run or praying or meditating. The point is, you process it without dumping it all over someone else. That's maturity. And I want you to really hear this. Emotional regulation is not just about you. It's about everyone around you. Because your lack of regulation doesn't just hurt you. It hurts your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, your friends. It makes life harder for them. But when you regulate, you give them safety. You create an environment where people can be real with you without fear. That's why this is such a crucial mark of maturity. Think about the leaders you respect the most. Are they the ones who explode in anger, who sulk in silence, who let stress run their lives? No, they're the ones who stay calm under pressure, who can take criticism without melting down, who can handle conflict without making it personal. That's what draws people in. That's what makes people trust you. And here's the truth. Maturity is not tested when everything is calm. It's tested when the storm hits. Anyone can look composed when life is easy. But when the pressure's on, when emotions are high, when people are watching, that's when maturity shows itself. And if you want to grow in this area, you've got to start practicing in the small moments. Practice when someone cuts you off in traffic. Practice when your kid spills the juice. Practice when your partner forgets something small. Because if you can't regulate in the little storms, you'll never regulate in the big ones. Now, I want you to reflect. What's your default when emotions hit? Do you explode? Do you withdraw? Do you get sarcastic? Do you blame? Whatever your default is, name it. That's the first step to growth. Then start practicing the pause. Start practicing breathing. Start practicing healthier outlets. And watch how your relationships change. Watch how your peace grows. Watch how people start trusting you more. Because that's the fruit of maturity. But immaturity hates responsibility. It hates it because responsibility requires humility. And humility is uncomfortable. Humility asks us to look at our flaws, to admit we don't have it all together, to acknowledge that we hurt people, sometimes even when we don't mean to. And for emotionally immature people, that feels unbearable. So they run, they blame, they rewrite history, they do anything to avoid that sting of accountability. And in doing so, they stunt their own growth. Here's the irony. The very thing they think will protect them, avoiding blame, is the very thing that destroys their relationships. Think about it. What happens to trust when every argument becomes a game of hot potato, tossing responsibility back and forth? What happens when every mistake is swept under the rug instead of acknowledged? Resentment grows, respect erodes, and eventually people get tired. They stop engaging because you can't reason with someone who refuses to take responsibility. That's why emotional immaturity, left unchecked, always leads to brokenness. Now, let's flip the lens. Maybe you're realizing that sometimes you do this. Maybe you're realizing you've caught yourself making excuses instead of owning up. I'll be honest, I've done it too. We all have. Taking responsibility isn't natural, it's learned. And the truth is, it's scary, because when you admit fault, you feel exposed. You feel like maybe you'll be judged, maybe people won't respect you anymore, maybe they'll see you as weak. But let me tell you this, the opposite is true. Taking responsibility doesn't make people lose respect for you. It makes them trust you more. It makes them lean in instead of pulling away. It makes you a safe person to be around. And that safety is priceless. Let me give you a practical example from the professional world. Imagine you're on a team at work and a project deadline gets missed. If the leader of that team says, "Well, it's not my fault. Everyone else dropped the ball," what happens? The team fractures. People feel thrown under the bus. Morale drops. But if that leader says, "I didn't set clear expectations. That's on me, and I'll do better next time," suddenly the atmosphere shifts. People feel supported instead of blamed. They feel motivated instead of discouraged. Responsibility breeds respect, always. And this isn't just about relationships with others. It's also about the relationship you have with yourself. Because when you refuse responsibility, you also refuse growth. You stay stuck in patterns where nothing changes because you've convinced yourself that you're never the problem. But when you own responsibility, when you can look yourself in the mirror and say, "I messed that up and I'm going to learn from it," you step into maturity, you step into power. Responsibility is not a burden. It's a gift. It's a key that unlocks progress. Here's the bottom line. Emotional immaturity runs from responsibility. Emotional maturity embraces it. And the moment you choose to take responsibility, even when it hurts, even when your ego is screaming at you to deflect, you separate yourself from the cycle of blame and excuses that keep so many people stuck. Responsibility is freedom. Responsibility is growth. Responsibility is love in action. So, if you want to know the top signs of emotional immaturity, yes, we've talked about deflection, we've talked about lack of empathy, we've talked about avoidance. But make no mistake, one of the clearest, most defining signs is this: when a person cannot, will not take responsibility for their actions. If you see it in someone else, be cautious. And if you see it in yourself, take it as an opportunity. Because the moment you lean into responsibility, you begin to mature, you begin to heal, and you begin to build relationships where trust can actually grow. And that's where I want to leave you with this keynote. Responsibility isn't weakness, it's strength. It's what separates leaders from blamers, partners from manipulators, growth from stagnation. Every time you choose responsibility, you are choosing maturity. And every time you run from it, you're choosing to stay stuck. The question is, which choice are you making?